Marcus died for just over 7 minutes following a severe allergic reaction. And in those 7 minutes, he says he was shown something specific. Not vague symbols. Not general warnings. A date. March 15th, 2026. And the reason it matters. This is his testimony, told in his own words, exactly as he shared it with us. My name is Marcus. I'm 47 years old. I run a small landscaping business, I coach youth football on weekends, and until about 8 months ago, I was the kind of man who would have laughed quietly at a story like the one I'm about to tell you. Not cruelly. I wasn't dismissive of other people's faith. I just had my own relationship with belief, which mostly meant I believed in what I could see and measure and hold in my hands. I believed in hard work and early mornings and the particular satisfaction of a job done right. I went to church occasionally, mostly for the people rather than the theology. I prayed sometimes in the broad, unfocused way of someone who isn't sure anyone is listening, but figures it can't hurt. I was a practical man. That's the best way I can put it. And practical men don't usually end up recording testimonies about what they saw on the other side of death. The day it happened was a Saturday in late July. I remember it was already warm before 8 in the morning. I had a full schedule of jobs lined up and my crew was meeting me at the yard at 9. I made coffee, fed the dog, checked my messages, texted my daughter who was away at university just to say good morning, the way I try to do every few days. She sent back a string of emojis, which is her version of I love you, and I smiled at my phone like a complete fool about it. Nothing felt different. Nothing felt charged or significant or weighted with the sense that this particular morning was going to divide my life permanently into a before and an after. I sat on my back porch with my coffee and watched the yard. The light was doing that early morning thing where it comes in low and turns everything gold. I remember thinking it was a good day to be alive. That thought, of all the thoughts I could have had, was the last clear one I remember from that morning. I had a severe nut allergy. Had it my whole life. Was careful about it the way you become careful about something after it nearly kills you once in childhood. I read labels. I asked questions at restaurants. I carried an EpiPen. These were just habits, automatic, woven into the background of every day. What I didn't know was that a neighbor had dropped off a tin of homemade biscuits the evening before. My wife had left them on the kitchen counter, meaning to tell me they might contain almonds, but had gone to bed before I got in. I grabbed one on my way through the kitchen to check something in the garage. Just one. Absent-minded. The way you reach for something 100 times without thinking. Within minutes, I knew something was wrong. The familiar tightening. The throat beginning to close. I got to my EpiPen, but I was already moving too slowly. I made it to the back door and called out to my wife before my legs stopped working. She found me on the porch. The same porch where I'd been sitting with my coffee 20 minutes earlier thinking it was a good day to be alive. She called the ambulance and administered the EpiPen, but the reaction had progressed too far too fast. By the time the paramedics arrived, my heart had stopped. I know all of this because she told me afterward. She told me in the particular careful way that people speak when they are describing something that nearly destroyed them and they are still figuring out how to carry it. I listened and I held her hand and I didn't interrupt. Because I knew that while she had been living through that terror, I had been somewhere else entirely. Somewhere I am still, in the truest sense of the word, recovering from having visited. The transition was not what I expected, though I hadn't consciously expected anything. There was no fade to black. No gradual dimming of the world the way a screen goes dark when a device runs out of power. One moment, I was on the porch, aware of my body failing, aware of the grass and the morning light and the sound of my own name being called. And then I was somewhere else. Or perhaps more accurately, I was something else. Still me, but released from the container I had always assumed was the whole of me. The first thing I noticed was the absence of the allergy. The absence of the tightening and the panic and the physical alarm of anaphylaxis. Gone. Not managed, not treated, not subsided. Gone in the way that something simply doesn't exist in a place where the rules that created it don't apply. I was aware. Vividly, completely, extraordinarily aware. More present than I had ever been in my life. Every thought was clear. Every perception was sharp. There was no fog, no confusion, no disorientation. I had left behind a body that was shutting down, and whatever I was now was the opposite of shutting down. I was more switched on than I had ever managed on my best morning with my strongest coffee. I have thought about this a great deal since. About what it means that consciousness does not diminish when the body stops. That whatever we are at our most fundamental level is not generated by the brain or maintained by the heart. It persists. It expands. It moves. We are not our bodies. We have bodies. There is a difference so vast between those two things that I don't think language has found the right words for it yet. I was free, and I was awake, and the world I had come from was already beginning to recede. I looked down. My porch. My yard. The morning light that had been so gold and ordinary 20 minutes ago now looked muted from where I was, like a photograph of a real thing rather than the real thing itself. My wife was kneeling beside me. I will not describe in detail what she looked like in that moment because she is a private person and she would not want her worst moment retold for an audience. But I will say that seeing her from that vantage point, watching her fight for me with everything she had, rearranged something in me permanently. The way we love people and the way we allow ourselves to feel that love are two very different things. For most of my life, I had kept a certain practical distance from the full weight of what my wife meant to me. Not cold, not unloving, just typically male about it, I suppose. Efficient with emotion, functional rather than full. Watching her from above, I felt it all at once. Every year, every morning, every argument we had moved through, and every quiet evening on that same porch. It arrived without filter or defense, and it was enormous. I thought, if I do nothing else when I get back, I will tell her properly. I will stop assuming she knows. I will say it the way it actually is, which is that she is the best thing in my life, and I have been casual with that truth for far too long. I also noticed something in those moments above the scene, a stillness around my body that felt almost protective, as though the space immediately surrounding where I lay was held by something invisible and deliberate. I can't explain it with any precision, but it didn't feel like I was simply lying abandoned on a porch. It felt like I was being watched over from a direction I couldn't quite see. Then the pull began. Upward and forward, gentle and absolute. I moved through a passage. Not dark, luminous. Alive in every direction with a light that was warm and directional, pulling me forward the way gravity pulls things down, consistently and without requiring my cooperation. There are moments in life where you are moving towards something and you can feel the significance of it before you arrive. The walk to the altar on your wedding day, the drive to the hospital when your child is being born. A quality of forward motion that carries more weight than ordinary movement. The passage felt like that. Only the significance it carried was so far beyond any earthly equivalent that the comparison is almost embarrassing. I was not afraid. I want to be clear about that because I think people assume fear would be the dominant experience. It wasn't. Not even close. The closest emotion I can identify is anticipation. A deep and settled anticipation, the kind that carries no anxiety, just forward-leaning readiness. The light around me deepened as I moved. Not brighter, deeper. As if each layer I passed through contained more of whatever the light was fundamentally made of. And it was made of something. It wasn't empty illumination. It carried information the way a conversation carries meaning. Being inside it was like being inside a language I hadn't known I spoke until the moment it surrounded me. I noticed that my experience of time had completely changed. Not stopped. Changed. There was no urgency in it. No sense of minutes passing. Just a sustained and complete present tense that expanded in every direction without edge or boundary. I thought briefly of my crew waiting for me at the yard. Then that thought dissolved, not because it stopped mattering, but because I was entering a context in which its scale was simply very small. The way a conversation you were worried about before a long journey seems small once you're somewhere extraordinary. I was arriving somewhere extraordinary. The peace came first, before anything I could see or identify, before any voice or figure or landscape. Peace arrived the way a climate arrives when you step off a plane somewhere warm. Surrounding and immediate and complete. But this was not the peace of a good situation. This was structural peace. Peace that didn't depend on anything being resolved or anything going right. Peace that existed as a fact of the place the way oxygen exists as a fact of our atmosphere. It was simply what the air was made of there. And then the voices, layered and warm and overlapping the way music overlaps when all the instruments are playing together and somehow each one is also distinct. I heard my father, who had died 11 years ago, not his voice from his last years when illness had changed it. His real voice, the one from when I was a boy and he was strong and the world felt safe because he was in it. That voice, unchanged and close and full of the particular warmth that only a parent's voice carries. I heard others too, people I had lost over the years. A friend from my 20s, a woman from our church who had died the previous winter and whose absence had left a visible gap in the congregation. They were present in the sound of that place without being physically before me, as if their voices were woven into the fabric of it. And underneath all of those voices was something else, a sound that wasn't quite sound, a resonance, a hum so deep and so pervasive that I felt it rather than heard it. And it carried one consistent communication, repeated without words in every direction. Your home, your home, your home. I had not known until that moment how much of my life I had spent feeling underneath everything else, slightly out of place. Slightly like I was moving through a world I didn't quite fit. That feeling, one I had never even named to myself, dissolved in that resonance completely. And then I was there, fully there, in a place that I have spent 8 months attempting to describe and have not once managed to do justice to. Light, but not the light of our sun or any artificial source. Light as a substance. Light as the material that everything was made of rather than something cast upon it. It moved. It breathed. It communicated. It had qualities that I have no words for because those words don't exist in any language built for people who have only ever experienced physical reality. The space was vast beyond measuring. Not empty vast, full vast. Rich and layered and alive in every direction. There was landscape, though landscape feels like too small a word for it. Rolling expanses of something that resembled hills and fields and sky, but carried a depth and a meaning that no physical landscape has ever carried. As if the beauty of it was not incidental but intentional. Not decoration, but communication. Every aspect of it saying something about the nature of the one who made it. The colors were not colors I can name. They existed beyond the visible spectrum in the way that frequencies exist beyond what human ears can hear. I could perceive them, but I cannot reproduce them. I try sometimes to describe them to my wife, and I watch her try to follow, and then I watch both of us arrive at the limit of language together. What I can say is this. Every beautiful thing I have ever seen on Earth, and I have seen some beautiful things in 47 years, was a reflection of this place. A faint and imperfect copy of something that existed here in its original form. Every sunset that ever took my breath away was this place, glimpsed sideways through the thin fabric of the physical world. Every moment of grace or wonder or inexplicable joy was this place, pressing through. This was the source of beauty, the original. And standing in it, everything else finally made sense. I was not alone in that place for long. He was there. I knew him before I saw him clearly. The way you know a close friend is in the room before you spot them in a crowd. A familiarity so deep it felt older than my own life. Older than time itself. Jesus. Not the gentle, distant figure I had been able to maintain a comfortable theological distance from my whole life. The living one. The actual presence behind every prayer ever offered and every moment of genuine love ever extended and every instance of mercy ever given when it wasn't deserved. He looked at me, and I had nowhere to hide and no desire to hide. Every wall I had ever built around the parts of myself I wasn't proud of was simply gone. Not torn down. Dissolved. Because in his presence those walls had no function. There was nothing to protect against. There was only love, the most honest and searching and complete love I had ever been inside of. He said my name, and I felt it land in a place deeper than hearing. Marcus. Not a summons. A recognition. The way a name is said by someone who knew you before you knew yourself. I did not fall to my knees. I simply arrived, somehow, in exactly the right posture for where I was. My whole self oriented toward him the way a compass needle orients toward north. Not by effort, by nature. He smiled, and in that smile I saw something I had never expected to find in the face of the divine: delight. He was genuinely, specifically, personally delighted to be standing with me. Me, a landscaper from Ohio who prayed occasionally and went to church for the community and thought the people who had dramatic spiritual experiences were probably just more emotionally expressive than he was. He delighted in me, and that, more than anything else I encountered in that place, broke me completely open. He showed me my life, not as a punishment or an audit, as a gift, as a way of showing me what had actually been happening behind the scenes of the ordinary days I had lived without fully understanding their weight. I saw my daughter being born. Not as a memory, I mean I was back there, fully present in the room, feeling everything I had felt in that moment, but now seeing it from outside as well. Seeing the expression on my face that I had never been able to observe. The way I looked at her for the first time. He said I was in that room. I have been in every room. I saw moments I had completely forgotten. A conversation with a young man on my cruise several years ago who had been going through something I hadn't known about, and I had, without any particular intention, said exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment. I had no memory of it. He showed it to me, and I could see the effect it had carried forward in that young man's life, rippling outward in ways I could never have traced from the inside of my own ordinary week. I saw the mistakes too. The times I had been too hard on people. The times I had been so focused on the job that I had missed the person doing it beside me. The years I had given my wife less of my real attention than she deserved. The times I had let pride sit in the way of an apology. He showed me all of it, and at no point did I feel condemned. I felt seen, which is different. Condemnation closes. Being seen opens. It was the most honest I had ever been about myself, and somehow it felt like relief rather than exposure. Then his expression changed, and I knew something specific was coming. Before he showed me the specific things he wanted me to carry back, he grounded me in some wider truths, things I needed to understand in order to properly hold what was coming. He showed me that time, the way we experience it on Earth, is a frame. Not a cage, but a frame. A specific and intentional context within which certain things can happen that cannot happen in eternity. Certain kinds of growth. Certain kinds of choosing. Certain kinds of love that carry weight precisely because they are offered freely within limits. Time is not the enemy of meaning. It is the condition under which a particular kind of meaning becomes possible. He showed me that history is not random. This surprised me. I had lived my life with a vague assumption that the world was largely improvised, that events unfolded through a combination of human decision and accident, and nobody was really steering the whole thing. What I saw was different. Not that every detail is controlled like a script, but that there is a wisdom and an intention moving through history the way a river moves through land, shaping it, working through it, never forcing, but always present, always purposeful. He showed me that the prayers of ordinary people across history have accumulated into something I can only describe as a reservoir. Every honest prayer ever prayed is held somewhere. Not lost, not unanswered, held with intention for the right moment. The faithful who lived and died without seeing the things they prayed for were not disappointed in eternity. They could see where their prayers had gone and what they had contributed to. And he showed me that certain moments in human history are hinges, points around which significant turning happens. Not all moments are equal in their weight. Some carry more. Some are appointments in the truest sense of the word, set and prepared and arrived at through a long accumulated sequence of everything that came before them. Then he looked at me with that particular focused seriousness and said, "I want to show you one of those moments." The scroll appeared. And as it opened, the images within it were vivid and immediate, and I knew, with the complete knowing of that place, that what I was seeing was real. I saw a date, not written on a page, written in the air itself, in light, with a weight and significance that made my whole spirit stand at attention. March 15th, 2026. He said, this date is a hinge, not an ending, not a catastrophe, a turning point. A moment in which multiple things that have been moving toward each other for a long time will arrive at the same point simultaneously. The first image I saw was of people, millions of them, spread across the globe, who had been living in a particular kind of spiritual sleep. Not bad people, not people without faith. People who had allowed the noise and speed and demand of modern life to crowd out the quiet where spiritual life actually grows. I saw them in their routines, phones in hands, moving fast, filling every silence. And underneath all of that movement, I could see something they couldn't. A hunger. A deep unmet hunger for something real and still and true. He said, around this time something will shift in the spiritual atmosphere. Not a disaster, a disruption. The kind that interrupts the noise long enough for people to remember they are more than what keeps them busy. The second image was of the church. Not any particular denomination or building. The global body of people who carry his name. And I saw a division within it that had been growing for years. A widening gap between those who had the form of faith and those who had the living thing itself. Two groups sitting in the same buildings, singing the same songs, reading the same words, but operating from completely different foundations. He said this gap would become visible around this time, not to destroy the church, to purify it, to make visible what was already true so that people could make honest choices about where they actually stood. The third image was more personal. I saw individuals, not famous ones, ordinary people making a decision around this period of time. Specifically the decision to stop deferring. To stop saying someday I'll get serious about my faith, someday I'll have that conversation, someday I'll deal with what I've been carrying. He said the Spirit was going to move in a way that made someday feel urgently insufficient. That people who had been on the edge of something real for years would feel, around this time, a pull so clear and so persistent that ignoring it would require active effort. And the fourth image was the one that has stayed with me most clearly. I saw a wave, not of water, of awakening, beginning quietly in small and unexpected places. In conversations between people who weren't supposed to be talking about faith, but found themselves doing it anyway. In moments of crisis that cracked people open and left them genuinely asking questions they had never allowed themselves to ask. In dreams, in encounters, in the simple and irreversible experience of someone being loved genuinely by someone who carried the real thing and couldn't keep it contained. This wave was not beginning on March 15th. It had been building, but that date, he said, was a moment of acceleration, of something gathering speed, of a chapter turning. He stood with me while the images settled, and I asked him to help me understand. Not just what I had seen, but what I was supposed to do with it. How to carry something this large back into a life this ordinary. He was patient and specific. The people sleeping in spiritual noise, he said, are not lost. They are simply distracted. And distraction is one of the most powerful forces in the enemy's toolkit precisely because it doesn't look like an attack. It looks like a full life. It looks like being busy and connected and productive. He said the antidote is not complexity. It is the simple and daily practice of choosing silence, of turning toward him before the day fills up, of treating prayer not as an emergency measure, but as the first breath of the morning. He said, the shift coming is an opportunity, not a punishment. When things become disrupted enough that the old distractions stop working, people have a choice. They can scramble to rebuild the noise, or they can sit in the unexpected quiet and discover what was always waiting in it. He said he was hoping for the second. He was working toward the second. But the choice would belong to each person individually. About the division in the church, he was both serious and tender. He said there is no condemnation in what's coming. He doesn't expose what is hollow to shame it. He exposes it because hollow things cannot carry what is coming. He said a movement is coming that will require containers strong enough to hold it. And the refining that feels difficult now is what builds those containers. About the individuals on the edge of decision, he said something that I have thought about almost every day since. He said, there is a moment when a door is open and a moment after which it is still technically open, but something has shifted. The invitation is always there, but the particular urgency of certain seasons is a gift. And gifts have a window. He looked at me directly. He said, March 15th, 2026 is not the day the world ends. It is a day in which the weight of what is spiritually available increases. A day when the distance between a seeking heart and a genuine encounter with me will be shorter than it has been in a long time. Tell them to be awake for it. Tell them not to waste it. Then he spoke the message plainly, without metaphor, without symbols, directly, the way you speak to someone you trust to carry something important. He said, go back and tell them this, that what is coming is not something to fear. It is something to be positioned for. That the people who are spiritually awake in this season will not be caught off guard because they will already be standing in the right place. He told me to tell people to do 3 things before March 15th. 3 simple and ancient things that have nothing innovative about them, but carry everything necessary within them. The first was to return to prayer, not performance prayer. Not the kind you do because it's on a list or because someone might be watching. Real conversation, honest and specific and daily. He said, talk to me like you're talking to someone who is actually there. Because I am. And I am not tired of hearing from you no matter how long you've been away. The second was to deal with what you've been carrying. The unresolved offense. The unforgiven wound. The relationship that has been broken and left that way because repairing it would require a vulnerability you haven't been willing to offer. He said, those things are not just personal burdens. They are closed doors, and the season that is coming will need every door open. The third was to pay attention to the people directly in front of you. He said the wave he had shown me would move primarily through personal encounter, not through broadcasts or platforms, but through one person who carries the real thing standing close enough to someone else that it transfers. He said, the most significant thing you will do in this season will not be public. It will be private. It will be a conversation, a presence, an ordinary Tuesday where you are fully awake and the person across from you needs exactly what you are carrying. He placed his hand over my heart. He said, you will doubt this when you return. You will have days where the clarity of this place fades and the practicality of your life crowds back in, and this will seem like something your oxygen-deprived brain invented. On those days, remember this moment. Remember that I know your name and I sent you back on purpose and the message is real. Then the light began to change. I didn't want to go. I feel like I've said that before in this testimony, and I'll probably say it again because it is simply, repeatedly true. There was nothing in me that wanted to leave that place. Not because my life was bad. My life was good. But that place was the source of every good thing my life had ever contained. Returning to the reflection when you've been standing in the original is genuinely hard. He understood. He looked at me with warmth and said, I know. And it will always feel like coming home when you return. You will miss this. But the missing will be a compass. Every time you feel it, let it point you back toward me rather than into distraction. That longing is not a wound. It is a guide. The passage back was not peaceful in the way the journey out had been. The direction had reversed, and so had the quality of the movement. Going toward heaven had felt like being welcomed. Coming back felt like being firmly and lovingly sent. Not rejected. Sent. The way a parent sends a child back to school after the holidays. With love and with clear purpose, but without softening the necessity of it. The light tightened around me. The space compressed. The warmth began to be replaced by something denser and heavier and more resistant. The particular specific weight of physical existence, of matter and limitation and time pressing back in from every direction. I heard my name from below, from the world I was returning to, my wife's voice. Tight with fear and loss and a love too large for the situation to contain. And hearing it, I moved toward it. Not because heaven had loosened its hold, because she was part of why I was being sent back. Because there were people in my life who needed the version of me that had been to that place and returned. I fell back into my body like stepping into cold water. Shock and sensation and the immediate assault of physical reality after the sustained perfection of where I had been. White ceiling. Harsh light, a beeping that I recognized from the outside of a situation, but had never heard from the inside of one before. A paramedic's face, then my wife's. Her face, the moment she saw my eyes open, is something I will keep somewhere safe for the rest of my life. There are moments that crystallize a person's love for you so completely that you could live on the memory of them for years. That was one. I tried to speak. What came out was inadequate to everything I needed to say. She took my hand. I held onto it with everything I had. The medical team did their work. Questions and assessments and the careful choreography of stabilization that I now understood, having watched it from above on my porch, was an act of love disguised as procedure. Every person in that room had decided to spend their life fighting for other people's survival. I wanted to tell them that. I was not yet coherent enough to form sentences, but I wanted them to know that what they did was seen. From a perspective I couldn't explain, it was seen. The days in hospital were their own kind of adjustment. My body had been through something significant, and the recovery was slow and real and unromantic in the way that physical recovery always is. Pain and monitoring and the indignity of depending on other people for basic things. I moved through it with a patience I wouldn't have had before, because every discomfort of those days was being measured, privately, against 8 minutes in a place so beautiful that hospital food and compression socks barely registered on the scale. The hardest part was not the physical recovery. It was the knowledge that I was carrying something I wasn't sure how to deliver. A message with a specific date in it, from a source that most people would reasonably be skeptical about. I came home 3 weeks later to my wife and my dog and my yard and the life I had lived for 47 years. It was familiar and I was different, and I had to learn how to be both of those things at the same time. The business continued. The crew showed up every morning. The jobs got done. The youth football team had their season. From the outside, I expect I looked much the same. Quieter maybe. More likely to pause before speaking. Less easily rattled by the small urgencies that used to feel large. I talked to my wife. Really talked to her. In the way I had promised myself I would from above the porch. Not one conversation, but many. Slow, honest ones that covered ground we had been standing near for years without walking across. She said once, a few months in, that it felt like she had got a different version of me back. I said I hoped it was a better one. She said it was. I believed her because she is not a woman who says things she doesn't mean. I started praying differently. Every morning, early, before the day filled up. Not with a list. With honesty. What I was carrying. What I was grateful for. What I was worried about even when I knew worry wasn't helping. Just real conversation with someone I now knew, from direct experience, was actually there. I became less patient with wasted time. Not in a driven way. In a quieter way. I began to notice the moments that mattered. A conversation with someone on my crew who was struggling. An evening with my daughter when she was home from university, and we sat on the back porch, the same porch, and just talked until it was dark. I stayed for those moments now in a way I hadn't always before, because I had been shown what they're actually worth. And the date stayed with me, March 15th, 2026. Not as a source of anxiety, as a reminder. A fixed point on the horizon that kept me oriented. That kept me asking every week whether I was doing the 3 things he had told me to do. Praying honestly, dealing with what I was carrying, being present with the people in front of me. I am not perfect at any of them, but I am consistently trying. And that, I believe, is the point. I want to be direct with you now. I'm not a pastor. I'm not a theologian. I'm a landscaper from Ohio who died on a Saturday morning and came back with something specific to say. If you are reading this before March 15th, 2026, I want you to hear this. The date is not a deadline. It is a doorway, a moment in which what is spiritually available to you will be more accessible than it has been in a long time. A moment when the distance between where you are and where you've been meaning to get to will be shorter than usual. The question is whether you will be awake enough to notice. You don't need to do anything dramatic to be ready for it. You don't need to sell everything or move somewhere or announce anything. You need to do the 3 things. Pray honestly. Deal with what you've been carrying. Pay attention to the people in front of you. That's it. That is the whole instruction. It is not complex. It is only difficult in the way that anything real is difficult, because it requires showing up consistently rather than impressively. If you are reading this after March 15th, 2026, hear this. Hinges don't lock when they turn. The door remains open. Whatever is available in a particular spiritual season does not evaporate the moment the calendar moves. What was true before that date is still true after it. He is still there. The invitation is still extended. The wave of awakening he showed me was not a single event. It was a movement. And movements continue. The deeper message in everything I experienced is not about a date. The date is the hook that gets your attention. The message beneath it is the same one that has always been true. He is real. Heaven is real. Your life has more significance than you can see from the inside of it. The people around you matter in ways you cannot fully measure. And every single day is both ordinary and eternal at exactly the same time. I died on a Saturday morning thinking it was a good day to be alive. I was more right than I knew. Because that day, the worst and most terrifying day of my wife's life, and arguably my own, turned out to be the day everything became clear. The day I stopped living at a practical distance from the deepest truths and started trying to live inside them instead. I am still a practical man, but I am a practical man who has stood in eternity and been spoken to by name and sent back with something to say. So here it is. Simply and finally, wake up. Pray honestly. Love the people in front of you. Deal with what you've been carrying. And when March 15th arrives, don't be sleepwalking through it, because the door will be open wide, and he will be on the other side of it, exactly where he has always been, waiting to say your name the way only he can say it. My name is Marcus. I died and came back, and this is what I saw. Asterisk, this testimony was shared with us by a man named Marcus, who asked us to publish it before March 15th, 2026. We are honored to carry it forward. Asterisk, if this reached you, please share it with someone who needs to read it.